Hello, everybody. Hi. So glad to be here at Center Stage right now. I am Kirsten Nelson, and I'm the program director for Center Stage. And yeah, thanks. and I'm really excited about the program this year. I think it's been really fun seeing everybody out there. And this is the session that I'm pretty giddy about. I am on stage right now with Heather Shaw. She is the CEO and chief designer at Vita Modus, company she started kind of based on a vision and now is just going completely nuts. So I'm really excited to be on stage with Heather. We're going to talk today about connecting artists with audiences through immersive media. And immersive is obviously a word that gets thrown around a lot, kind of abused, and it's kind of like, what does it even mean anymore? But I think what Heather can speak to is when an artist comes to her and comes to Vita Modus and says, I want to do something completely different, but I genuinely want to feel connected with my audience out there too. How can we do that? And how can we make it cool and unforgettable? So that's just a little bit about what you do. Is that how you would describe it? When an artist comes to you, what are they looking for?
Yeah, so when an artist comes to us, they generally want to be on the cutting edge. They want to be the first person to have an arcade fireball drop, or the first person to use projection mapping, or the first person to use the latest technology in a really unique way. So in general, they want to feel connected to the cutting edge of art, of design, of show direction, of narrative. Yeah, cutting edge is, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because this is a time where everyone's asking for the cutting edge. It's like, okay, cutting edge, out of the box, do something different, something I've never seen before, something that's going to be memorable and social media friendly. There's a lot of pressure now, and I think you've started, your clients now are these people who feel immense pressure every time they go on tour or have a festival to do something completely different than ever before. I think when they ask you for something that's never been done before, you talked a little bit about creating a story and a narrative and working with them and having that move through an entire production or an event. How do you start to get into the story that they want to tell? Or do you choose it, or do you?
It really depends on the client or the brand or the festival, but in general, if they don't already have an idea of what they want to be portraying in their show, we will start from scratch and do a pretty intensive R&D on who the brand is, who the artist is, and try to really reach into what they've been and how they've evolved and how we can take them to another level through art and through technology and through narrative.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I think at this point, is technology as a thing, it seems like that's what they want. That's kind of what they think of first, right? Like, how can we make it super high tech?
Yeah, so when a client does come to us asking, we want a projection map stage, or we want to use the transparent LED, or when they come to us in general with a technology they want to use, we always kind of try to convince them to not think about the technology first and let us come to them with a story and then find the most cutting edge technology that works best for that story, because sometimes it's not always connected to that particular technology.
So yeah, it sounds like first you have to come up with who the artist's their persona and their image and what they want to put out there, and then how you can support that story.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's cool. So then you meet with the artist, and then do you start to look at the size of the venue and the location? Does that start to play into how you're going to design a show?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on if we're designing for a musical artist for a concert touring stage, or if we're designing a 360-degree immersive environment for festivals, and if that festival is more of a branded festival, or if they're more of an electronic dance music festival. It all kind of depends on what that environment is, but we have to pretty much look at the logistics of the tech and the engineering and the what is viable for the environment, for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I know we talked about when you're starting the design process, you kind of jokingly said that you have to think illogically for a long time before you can get Is that
Yeah.
is that a real alarm? You have to think illogically for a long time before you can start to hone it back down to like what you can actually produce in the reality.
Yeah.
I guess could you kind of describe that? You have a futurist viewpoint on things. Your background as an automotive designer kind of informs things. When you start to think illogically, what's the first thing that leaps into your mind, and then?
And I think for our process, we really want to, originally try to not do something that's ever been done before. So we want to be at the forefront of the art and technology movements, and anything that we have seen before, we try to kind of like throw it out of our mind and start something that is totally illogical, totally impossible, and then try to figure out how to make it more feasible.
Okay.
But that's our job as designers, is to kind of be crazy and a little bit impossible, and get the engineers and the technicians to help make that possible.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and it seems like you have a really good mix of, physical materials and environments, still things like fabrics and like and structural materials, and then you combine that with technology where it makes sense. I guess could you talk a little bit about how when you choose like physical things and then versus technological things and how they can mix together?
So it really depends. For us, the design, generally speaking, is very sculptural. So when we think of something, for example, at this festival with EDC, we try to make these really sculptural pieces and then figure out if we can get content or video panels or projection mapping in a really unique way that can be on a sculptural aspect that really people haven't seen before. So we'll choose materials based on, or at least we'll choose the tech based on if it's going to fit inside of our sculpture, but then choose materials based on engineering and wind and ratings like that.
Yeah, exactly. If it's outdoors, you have to worry about actual conditions like that too, weather and stuff. Yeah, I think that's the interesting conundrum, is once you've come up with the form and how it could look, then there's the question of how's the sound going to move through the space. Do you end up having to work with the sound and video people directly to figure out how that works, or how do you make that all fit together?
At the beginning of a project, we generally don't have the PA at the front of our mind usually. So it depends. Like when we're creating festival structures that are temporary festival structures, those structures, generally speaking, will have to have more clear spans. So when the PAs are up, they're not getting in the way of the sound. So we have to actually start designing a little bit more with the technology and the sound in mind, in terms of structures. But then on some of these big electronic dance music stages, the PA systems are so large, it generally ends up being something that's kind of in the front of a lot of the sculpture. And so what we would hope one day is that we can get these PA systems to be a part of the sculpture and a part of the design, and maybe even a part of the content, and to have the technology integrate a little bit more into some of those systems.
Yeah, maybe that's an opportunity. I mean, I think all the time at this show there's new speakers coming out, so maybe they need to start thinking about how they could integrate more into the physical infrastructure in a beautiful way. Yeah, so if anyone wants to work with Heather Shaw on a loudspeaker design, we could probably do something pretty cool that is never been seen before. That's the goal these days, right? Yeah, and I think that's interesting because the electronic music, or EDM, those are the shows where this stuff was kind of, where first we could go really nuts with this stuff. I mean, have you seen a progression of, it kind of began in electronic music and then now it's starting to become more, what have you seen over the span of your career?
I feel like the electronic dance scene has helped to, well, it has propelled my business and our career here, because inside of that scene, especially with the DJs and the performers, and the producers, they really want to have the most wild and craziest structure that's on stage. Whereas when we work with artists like Shakira or Mariah Carey, it is real that the audience is coming to see them. So we have to stay a little bit more muted in terms of the design and focus more on the artists. So in the electronic dance scene, there's been a really big push for creative and sculpture and content and media in unique ways that are taking over the entertainment part of it, where the producer kind of sits in the background. We even had some producers want to be hidden inside of their structure and barely get seen, so we can use smart glass and frost and clear the glass to get them seen. So it's kind of interesting.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. That's one of my favorite parts of that whole scene, you know, like wearing masks or whatever. They don't want to be seen.
Yeah.
It's, like you said, you have to elevate. The pop stars want to be elevated, and the backdrop is almost just another way to push them forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's kind of an amazing design process. So I guess one of the things I was trying to figure out is because you get to work in such a far-fetched version of what we all do here, audio and video design and lighting and how we're going to fit it all together, how it all actually is going to work together. I guess when people are asked to create a live music experience or a production, what are some of the things they should be careful not to forget? You know, what factors are important to remember when you're trying to create something completely original, but it's grounded in what's possible with AV. But what's the other stuff you should probably remember if you're thinking past the speakers and the video displays?
I think one of the things that gets forgotten on that front end when someone's asking for something that is groundbreaking and unique and on the cutting edge is the budget. Because a lot of times the client, the brand, the artist, they'll always ask for something huge and then come with a smaller budget. And I think it's important to remember the budget.
Yeah, I think pretty much everyone here ends up having to work with that in mind, unfortunately. That is the limitation we all deal with, right? That and maybe gravitational pull, stuff like that. Yeah. So I guess one of the things I'm kind of fascinated with in the things you do for festivals and everything are the entrances. You know, you have to create at a festival or at a production. Like, let's say something we were talking about before is sometimes you're creating a production that's only like a 90-minute show. Sometimes you're working on something that's going to last over multiple days in the desert, and it needs to be meaningful every time. How do you try to make that feel remarkable every time someone enters a show or sees it for the first time?
So it definitely, it can be difficult between a 90-minute show or a 3 to 5 day festival to figure out what somebody sees when they first get there, and if somebody stays engaged the whole time, and what they take away when they leave. The 90-minute show can be a little bit easier to tailor and to figure out that narrative that goes from the beginning to the end and has a really nice arc. But then the 4 to 5 day festival with a bunch of different artists on that particular stage, it's kind of a challenge to create a unique design on stage that still becomes a blank canvas for different artists to still play on. So the content or the video screens, and for us, we want to be very sculptural and unique. And then in that particular genre of music that's playing on the stage, create a story about that design. For example, with EDC Las Vegas, we work on the bass pod stage, and the bass pod stage is a very drum and bass heavy stage. So we created a story that these robots came from space to play with the audience. And so we had these dirty robots for year one, and these robots were in a really sculptural way covered in content and media, and they were 360 for the whole audience to be engaged in. But then when we're creating that universe, we do want them to have like a portal coming through it so that they know that they're now in this new world. So there's usually a portal that we'll design that has some sort of entrance or changing of the worlds so that you go into it.
Wow, and I think that's interesting because that gives us there's a lot of possibilities in that in every kind of project. You know, that moment when you first encounter it, and then maybe that time you see it again for the 5th time, how every time it can feel like you've just crossed into something new. I think that's where you can kind of combine technological with, like you're saying, the visual elements, you know, that.
Yeah, for sure. And the elements of when you see it for the first time usually can be from quite a distance. So taking the design for something that looks really iconic from far, but then also you can get into the details when you're up close to it, is something that we try to do as well. And inside of the sculpture, when we're creating sculpture, it's quite challenging to find the right product that can get us into like content on sculpture, because most of the gear that we find, everything's made as a box or made, inside the box. So we try to think outside the box and then have trouble fitting boxes to that, because it just doesn't fit as well sometimes.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and that also would work with the stage production too. Like some people will have those seats way up in the upper, like if they need that show to be big enough for them too. Is that another challenge?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Cool. Well, I think that made me think of something else. When you're trying to create, I guess is kinetic architecture something that you're having to add even more to? Do these have to be movable at this point? Does everyone expect that to keep that thing fresh, it has to be kinetic as well?
I think the kinetic aspect for us always needs to be connected to a narrative. So artists will come to us saying they want things moving on stage. We always then try to tell them to kind of separate their mind from the technology first and let us come up with a story and a narrative and a reason for the thing to move, because a lot of times when there's just something kinetic and moving on stage, it may not necessarily be part of the show. It just feels like someone's moving something on stage. So
exactly,
it needs to have a real connection to the show.
Oh, okay. And maybe that's the hardest part of this question, is this conversation. How do you talk with an artist to help them talk about their story? Like what kind of words are you trying to get out of them, and then you can run with it?
We do ask them literally for words and adjectives. We'll just, what are things that they want to show about themselves. We do have a pretty long list of questions that we just try to open up with an artist to get close with them and figure out where they want to take their brand, where they want to evolve to, and to kind of try to help get us there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, speaking of brands,
there's one.
Yeah, with Adidas there. I think that's an interesting thing too, because obviously brands now are really trying to change their story out there too. Are you seeing a lot more of that? Brands coming to you saying, please make us into rock stars? Like,
definitely brands want to be connected to the cutting edge as well, and connected to artists, and they are looking for an immersive experiential event, usually some sort of touring walkthrough. For a lot of brands, it's an interesting ask. Usually they'll ask us for something like the Museum of Ice Cream or something like the Happy Place, which is really made a benchmark in the community these days. But we, like for this event, we like to kind of take it towards something that's a little bit more of a technological Museum of Ice Cream, where the walkthrough is walking through different technologies and learning about different technologies and being able to take pictures inside of different technologies. Like this is a hologram hallway where we've got holo film in front of the person and a rear projection screen behind them, and they can walk through the hallway and take a photo from the front, so they're like immersed in this hologram photo booth. So we like to kind of take that Instagram moment and use technology as a way to make an Instagram moment. Yeah.
So I guess with that way, you're trying to create these moments and then constantly trying to change it. I guess as we look to the future and what's ahead, I guess what do you feel like is you are a futurist. That's that's how you describe it. You pull in influences as a futurist. I guess what do you feel like? What's left to build? What's the next connection we need to make?
Yeah, like you said, we are really inspired by the future. We like to study futurists and kind of take on what could be in the future and walk a little bit backwards. And in the temporary design space, we have the opportunity to try stuff out and do it for 3 days and let audiences use it and see how things will work. So we like the idea of testing things out for the future and testing out future environments and making people feel like they're in the future for a moment. And I think that the whole graph of the evolution of technology and the movement of technology being so exponentially, growing so exponentially, for us is extremely inspiring because it's made our art have many options, and it's grown exponentially. So for me, the future just feels so unknown because it will grow even more exponentially, and so there's opportunity, big opportunity for growth. I don't know what hasn't been built yet, but
Yeah,
I'm excited to get there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel like that's a good sign for all of us here. There's so much more, so many more things to build. So yeah. All right. Well, with that, that concludes our chat with Heather Shaw today. And I just want to say thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Heather, for being here.
Thank
That was
you.
really
Thank you for
amazing.
having me.